So recently, a viewer reached out to see if I could make them a custom ring using this brass bullet casing. And they told me that the story behind it is that the bullet was actually used on them in a crime. And thankfully they survived the experience, but through the healing process they ended up using it as a bit of a catalyst to help transform their life for the better. So they wanted this ring to help represent that positive change in their life. So after going over some ideas, here's the finished design that I came up with here in Blender. And you can see the bullet casing is going to be mounted in the head of the ring. And there's also a good amount of detail in the design with some decorative filigree that's framing a center cross on both shoulders. And as you can see, there's also some raised lettering that's going all the way around the rim right underneath the head of the ring. And to actually mount it to the ring, the plan is to cut off the end of the casing right at this bottom flat section. And the ring is designed with a bit of a cavity to where that can be seated into place. So with designs like this, I always like to kind of plan out how I'm going to cast it. So in Blender, I'm using a modeled flask and sprue base just to kind of orient how I'm going to cast this ring. And because it's pretty even thickness pretty much throughout, I'm just going to cast it kind of standing up like this. And I'm also going to print this model with some sprues attached. So I'm just going to drop in a cylinder that I can use as the main sprue to attach down here at the bottom. Then I'm going to attach a few extra sprues going from that base to right underneath the head of the ring. And that'll help feed the molten metal straight to the head of the ring where there's quite a bit of detail, because I want that to fill in as quickly as possible. So once that's set up and the ring model is actually joined into one piece with those sprues, I can go ahead and drop that into the slicer program, or I can add some extra supports for 3D printing. And in this case, the sprues actually kind of work as supports themselves. So it's nice that I don't really need too many extra supports when printing. And thankfully the lettering is also at a little bit of an angle, so even though it looks like there's a lot of undercuts with it, it should print just fine. And I'm going to be printing this model with a Frozen Sonic Mini 8K. And I'm also using some Jamg High Wax Plus resin. And this is some castable resin that I've used quite a bit in the past, but works great for casting projects like this. So here's the finished print after cleaning it up a little bit with some IPA. And you can see all that detail came out really nice. And I just need to work on removing some of these supports before curing. And the tricky thing with printing the sprues with the model is that you really need to be careful about removing the supports, obviously, without touching those sprues. So in this case, I'm just going in with an X-Acto knife to try to break away those smaller supports. And for those supports that are a little bit thicker, I actually like to use these thin cuticle scissors. These work really nice for getting into those hard to reach spots. So after that, I can just go in with a rounded diamond burr to smooth off those small bumps from the supports. And then I can toss it into the curing station to cure for about 10 minutes. And once that's done, I can go ahead and attach it to the rubber sprue base, just like I had it set up in Blender. And I'm just heating up a little bit of sprue wax to hold it in place. So now I can go ahead and pop on the solid wall flask, making sure to add some tape around the rim to catch any of that investment that kind of expands during the vacuum process. Now in past videos, I know that I tend to skip over the investing process, and honestly it's just because it's really hard to juggle going back and forth with filming everything and mixing and doing the vacuuming process at specific times. But I wanted to make sure that I caught it pretty good here. So here's the basic rundown of what I'm doing. So after measuring the exact ratios that I need for the investment and the water, I go ahead and add the investment into the bowl of water first, and then immediately start the timer on my phone for 3 minutes. And I then mix for that entire 3 minutes, making sure it is nice and smooth without any kind of lumps, before tossing that in the vacuum chamber to remove any bubbles, and that sits there for about a minute or so. Really, I just look at the bubbles in the investment. So all those bubbles will get bigger and expand outwards and kind of raise the level of the investment. So once that goes up and the majority of the bubbles pop, it then kind of sinks back down. And at that point, that's when I start kind of jostling around and vibrating the bowl just to remove any of those smaller bubbles. And once those are all pretty much gone, I then release the pressure and take the bowl out to replace those with the flasks. Then I just carefully fill up the flasks with the investment, making sure to leave about 1/4 of an inch space from the top before vacuuming them again and removing any remaining air bubbles. So after letting that cure for a couple of hours, it's ready to be cleaned up a little bit, and from here it can go straight into the kiln. And here's the burnout schedule that I like to use with this resin. It seems to work pretty well. And I'll let the flask sit at that final casting temperature of 900 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour before casting. So I'm going to cast this ring in some Deox sterling silver casting grain from Rio Grande. And this is my first time using this stuff, but it is kind of specially formulated to be used specifically for torch casting. So it has a little bit of additives in order to help keep the oxides low when this is melted. So there should be little to no fire scale after casting. So I'm just using some MAP gas to melt this down. And once that's good and melted, I can go ahead and take the flask out of the kiln and directly put it on the vacuum table for casting. So as soon as that button cools down to a nice cherry red, I can go ahead and quench that in some water to break away all that investment. And here's the raw casting, just after a little bit of cleanup work with a brush, but you can see it came out really nice and clean. So I think that Deox casting grain really made a big difference because I can't see any kind of oxidation on this whatsoever. So now I can start on sawing off the sprues from the inside of the ring and cutting off that button down at the bottom. And once that's rough cut, I can start on filing away those sprue marks, making sure to follow the profile around the band. And for these little sprue marks on the inside, I'm just going to use a splitted sanding mandrel with some 320 grit sandpaper on it and start to blend out those marks before switching to a higher grit. So next I just like to go through with some silicone polishing abrasives and just do a light polish to start. And I'm going to end up doing more of a polish later on with some polishing compound, but this is just kind of preliminary to really even out the surface. Now for the bullet casing, at this point I've really held off on cutting off the bottom just yet. And that's because I want something to hold on to while I kind of sand down the edge. So to affix it in place, instead of soldering, I'm actually going to be gluing this in place. And this is really to just have a bit more control over the finishes on both of them. So I'm leaving the end of the bullet kind of lightly polished while really polishing up the rest of the ring to make it nice and shiny. This would be really hard to do that with soldering, so using a really strong glue should work just fine. But I also want the fit up to be really tight in there. I basically want it to hold in place by itself really well. So I'm just sanding away the edge of the bullet until there's really a nice friction hold when I kind of press them together. So once those fit together really well, now I can go ahead and cut off the end of the casing. And I'm just holding it with some pliers and gradually working around, and I'm really trying to stay pretty straight with my cut. You can see after it's cut off, I was actually cutting through a section that's a little bit thicker with the brass, and that was right at the bottom of where the primer is. So it should be noted this was very well cleaned out beforehand, so there's absolutely no gunpowder left in it and is totally safe. But now I'm just going to go through and flatten this out and make it nice and smooth so that it fits down in that cavity really well. And it was a bit tricky to hold onto here. I really didn't have any pliers that could hold onto it well and still give me kind of the space in order to file it flat. So I had to get a little bit creative by just holding it with my fingernails and resting it up against the flat section on my bench pin. And this felt a little awkward at first, but really the bench pin is kind of taking most of the force, and I'm just steadying it with my fingers. So now I can start working on the final polish. So I'm just going to use some nylon brushes and some polishing compound and really shine up the inside of the ring first before moving on to the outside. And in order to get that detail to pop really nicely on the ring, I'm going to darken it first with some liver of sulfur. So I'm just taking some hot water and adding some liquid liver of sulfur before dropping the ring in and letting that sit for a bit. And once that's good and dark, I can go ahead and rinse that off in some warm water and baking soda to neutralize any of that acid. I could then move on to putting the final finish on both pieces. So like I said, I'm just doing a light polish on the end of the casing. The idea is to keep all the wear marks that are on there originally intact. I just want a little bit of shine on it. And with the ring, I'm just using some buffing wheels and some polishing compound to really shine up the ring and especially bring out those high spots. So now I can go ahead and glue the bullet casing in place. And I'm just going to drop in a bead of glue before lining up the casing and pressing that into place. And because I made sure that it has such a snug fit, I really only have one shot at lining up everything before pressing it into place. But once that's pressed down with the glue, it is really not going anywhere. So I can just clean up any excess glue, and after 24 hours of curing, it should be good to go. So here's the finished ring, and I'm really happy with how this one came out. I think those accents in the design really helped to complement the bullet casing and just make it stand out. This was really such a powerful piece to work on, and it's really an awesome experience to help someone bring something so meaningful to life. That's all for this video, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.